They delivered her to me in silence. Her father stood at the edge of my study, hands trembling, eyes darting to the floor as if looking anywhere but at me. He'd lost everything, his wealth, his power, his pride. All he had left to offer was her. Charlotte Davis. The daughter of the man I swore to ruin. And now, my bride. She walked into the room with her chin raised, refusing to show fear, but I saw it. Fear always betrayed itself in the smallest details, the quickening of her pulse at her throat, the way her fingers curled against her gown, the slight tremble in her breath. Beautiful. Untouchable. Mine. I had seen her once before, years ago at her father's wedding. She had laughed that night, all brightness and privilege, her golden hair shimmering under the chandeliers. I remembered the sting of her dismissive glance, the way she looked through me as though I were nothing more than dust on her silk slippers. That look had burned itself into my memory, hardening into ice. And now she stood before me, no longer the untouchable princess. She belonged to me.
I had expected shame, maybe tears in my father's eyes, when he led me into that room. But there was nothing. Just silence. And the man waiting inside, him. His presence filled the space before a word even left his lips. Cold, commanding, dangerous. His dark suit clung to his frame like armor, his gaze sharp enough to pierce bone. I knew who he was, of course. Everyone in our world whispered his name with equal parts fear and awe. Alexander Blackwood. Ruthless billionaire. The man who broke enemies with a flick of his hand. And now he was looking at me as though I were already his possession. I tried to meet his stare with defiance, but my chest tightened. My body betrayed me. I wanted to run, to scream at my father for selling me like some bargaining chip. But I stood frozen, because I understood what this meant. A debt. A repayment. And I was the currency.
Leave us, I told her father without breaking eye contact. The coward obeyed, slipping out of the room like a shadow. Her gaze followed him, desperation flickering in her eyes, and for a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. But pity had no place here. Not after what her father had done to me. Charlotte, I said, tasting her name as though it were forbidden fruit. You will be my wife. Her lips parted, and I could almost hear the protest rising in her throat. But she swallowed it down, pride forcing her into silence. Brave girl. Foolish girl. Did she think silence would save her? Did she think I didn't notice the fire in her eyes, the way her body tensed, ready to fight even when she was already defeated? She reminded me of that night years ago. The night her indifference cut me deeper than any blade. She had looked at me then as though I didn't exist, as though I was beneath her. And now? Now she was standing in front of me, not as a princess, but as my payment.
The words struck me like chains snapping around my wrists. You will be my wife. Not a question. A command. Heat flushed through me, rage, humiliation, fear. I wanted to spit the word no into his face. I wanted to remind him I was not a prize to be claimed, not some pet to be caged in his mansion of steel and glass. But my father's debt weighed on me like a boulder. There was no choice, not really. His ruin would drag me down with him, and Alexander Blackwood knew it. I forced my chin higher. And if I refuse? The corner of his mouth curved into something sharp, not quite a smile. Then I take what's owed by other means. But I'd prefer the ceremony. It makes everything cleaner. His voice was low, dangerous, like velvet lined with knives. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just taking me to punish my father. He was taking me because he wanted me. For reasons I couldn't understand, for wounds I couldn't see. The thought made my skin prickle. Because beneath my fear, a darker truth lingered. Part of me wanted to understand.
Defiance blazed in her eyes, and for a fleeting second I admired her courage. Most would crumble before me, beg for mercy. But not Charlotte Davis. She had spirit. Good. I would enjoy breaking it. I'll give you time to adjust, I told her, stepping closer until I could feel the tension rolling off her body. But make no mistake, Charlotte. You are mine now. Every breath you take, every step you walk, every glance of those proud eyes, it all belongs to me. Her silence was an answer in itself. I didn't need her agreement. The contract had already been signed in blood and betrayal. And soon, she would learn what it meant to be bound to a man like me. I had my driver bring her straight to Blackwood House. No fanfare, no announcements, I preferred the silence of inevitability. The city bowed to my name, the house bowed to my will. I watched her step out of the car, the hem of her dress catching on the wind like a white flag she refused to wave. For a heartbeat I studied her as if she were a problem to be solved, posture, gait, the tiny way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other when uncertain. She followed me inside as if she'd practiced obedience. I led her through halls where portraits of ancestors surveyed us with permanent disapproval. Marble, glass, and the kind of space that swallowed noise whole, a perfect place to bury secrets and shape a life the way a sculptor shapes clay. Tonight you will stay in the guest wing, I told her when we reached the library. My voice made the word stay into a command with edges. Tomorrow we will arrange the formalities. A wedding is a performance, I dislike improvisation. Her jaw worked. She did not reply. That silence was an affront I enjoyed. I wanted to see the fissures form in that proud armor. I wanted to watch her adapt, to see whether the fire in her eyes would slowly become embers, or whether it would flare and consume something of me in return. I closed the distance between us, near enough that she could smell the citrus of my cologne and the faint trace of old tobacco on my cuffs, relics of a life built on habits and late nights. You will learn the rules, I said. You will learn where you belong. I will not be cruel without reason, Charlotte. I am precise in my cruelty. She lifted her chin. And if I never learn? I almost laughed. The sound stopped inside me like a swallowed bullet. Then I will teach you. There was a pause, an invisible ledger balancing our worlds. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent. Inside, the quiet felt like an oath.
The house was an organism of cold surfaces and long shadows. Every step I took echoed, and my heartbeat felt too loud in my chest. I caught my reflection in a gleaming panel, a woman in a gown that suddenly felt like a costume stitched for someone else's play. I tried to steady myself against the swell of panic. He spoke like a man used to settling terms and closing deals. Precise in his cruelty. The sentence was intended to cut me down to size, but all I could do was keep breathing. Breathe, Charlotte, I told myself, because if you stop breathing you might forget why you are angry. He said he would teach me. The thought should have been terrifying, and part of me was. Yet beneath the fear there was an ugly, bewildering curiosity. How does a man who controls empires teach a woman to bend? What tools did he use? What part of me did he think he could break? I imagined my father, somewhere alone and humbled, imagining his daughter's obedience would salvage his name. I imagined the ledger he had signed with shaking hands, the one whose ink spelled my life. I promised myself I would not make it easy for either of them. That night they put me in a room with high windows that framed the city like a distant painting. The bed was vast and uninviting. A fireplace burned with slow, controlled flames. The only concession to comfort was the way the light caught the silk on my shoulders. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe, mapping exits like an escape plan in a cruelly idle exercise.
She pretended to sleep, I could tell by the way her breath slowed but never deepened. I watched her for a long time, thinking about the first night I'd seen her, a glittering hall and a laugh that skimmed across my face like wind over water. Did she remember? Did she know she had been the spark that set everything into motion? I had not always planned revenge with such devotion. That night had been different, impetuous, raw. His betrayal had been a complex ledger of lies, 1,000 small cuts wound tight into a larger strategy that cost me my company, my reputation. I had lost more than money, I had lost faith in the idea that people acted with honor. And when I had seen Charlotte then, smiling at her father like a pearl on a string, something colder grew in me, a resolve to dismantle everything he loved. But the truth was more dangerous to admit. I remembered the curve of her smile, the careless lift of her wrist when she laughed, and a prickle of something else, an unexpected, unreasonable want. Hate and hunger are cousins, they share blood and sometimes the same breath. I turned from the doorway and left her to the quiet. Predators do not need to roar to be feared. Sometimes the most effective control is restraint. Tomorrow I would organize the marriage. Tomorrow I would begin the slow arithmetic of ownership.
Morning arrived grey and close. The sun filtered through curtains like a question. I dressed with steady, deliberate motions, refusing to let him have the sight of me unprepared. I tied my hair back, smoothed my dress, and practiced an expression somewhere between dignity and defiance. He met me at the bottom of the sweeping stairs as if he had expected me to comply with everything down to the minute. His suit was impeccable, his posture, immutable. The staff moved like shadows around him, efficient and silent, the house's veins working to circulate the life inside. "You will do as I ask today," he said, not unkindly. "Appear to the world. The spectacle is important." "Fine," I said. The word tasted like gravel. "I will perform. But do not expect me to be grateful." He regarded me then with something that could have been amusement or appraisal. It was hard to tell, and he did not make it easier. "I don't expect gratitude. Only compliance." We stepped into the light together, Two figures bound by an arrangement nobody had consented to but the one who had the power to decide. Outside, the city watched and whispered. Inside me there was anger, and beneath that anger a more private thing, a quiet, tremulous self that wondered, not for the first time, whether power could be measured in money alone, or if there were other currencies he was yet to learn to count. We would dance this dance for a little while longer. I would play the role assigned to me. He would measure, instruct, and perhaps, if I was very careful, he would reveal the parts of himself that explained him. And when the world demanded an answer, we would give them one, carefully choreographed and utterly devastating. He took my hand before the ceremony, not with affection but with the kind of grip that anchors a ship in storm. "Remember," he said softly, and for the first time his voice lacked the edge of threat. "This is not only about them. It is about us." I met his glance, and under the armor of my own fury I felt a small, foolish thing, the earliest flicker of curiosity.
The wedding was over before I could taste it. A blur of champagne and whispers, of vows spoken with the weight of steel rather than love. The city applauded because it adored performances, not because it cared who we were behind the veil. But when the doors closed, when the applause thinned into silence, it was no longer theater. It was reality, mine and hers. She stood across the marble foyer with her back impossibly straight, chin tilted like she refused to surrender even to exhaustion. I admired it, even as it irritated me. I thought I would savor this moment, my victory over a man who had wronged me, over the debts he thought he could ignore. Yet the satisfaction was fractured. For every shard of revenge glinting in my chest, there was something else pressing in, the undeniable awareness of her. Charlotte Davis, who carried defiance in her silence better than most men carried armies. "Are you proud of yourself?" she asked finally. Her voice was quiet, measured, but it struck harder than shouting. I let the question hang. Pride was cheap, I trafficked in power. And yet, her words dug beneath the armor I wore. "I am satisfied," I answered. "That is enough." But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true.
The gown still clung to me like a costume, heavy with the scent of roses and expectations. I wanted to rip it off, shed the skin they had stitched me into. Instead, I held his gaze and forced myself not to blink. Satisfied. That was the word he chose. Not happy. Not proud. Satisfied, as if I were a contract delivered on time, a figure reconciled in his ledger. I should have hated him for it. And part of me did. But another part, the part one did not want to admit existed, wondered what he looked like without the mask of vengeance. So I smiled, sharp enough to cut. "Then you've collected your payment. What now, Alexander? Do I sit on a shelf like a trophy? Or do you plan to parade me until the shine wears off?" His jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat I thought I had gone too far. But then he stepped closer, his presence wrapping around me like smoke. "You mistake me," he said softly. "I didn't marry you to set you on a shelf. I married you to keep you where I can see you, where you cannot be taken from me." It should have frightened me. Instead, it unsettled me in a way I couldn't name.
The truth was uglier than I wanted to admit. Her father's debt had brought her here, but it was not numbers alone that had driven me. It was memory of a laugh she had once given me years ago, careless and golden, before betrayal had twisted my path. I told myself I wanted to ruin her father, to dismantle him piece by piece. But when I saw her now, the same curve of lips, the same fire that refused to dim, I knew part of me had always wanted this. Wanted her? Revenge and desire are cousins. I could no longer tell which one had guided me to this moment. So I gave her what I never gave anyone, honesty. "You think I'm satisfied with ownership alone?" I said. "No. I want more. I want to see you bend without breaking, to see whether that fire in you can be shaped rather than extinguished. I want to see if you can live here not as debt, but as something else." Her breath hitched, barely noticeable, but enough for me to catch. Enough to remind me this was no longer a clean transaction. This was dangerous.
I should have laughed at him. Should have told him no empire, no name, no contract could turn me into something other than myself. But the way he spoke, not as a man declaring victory, but as someone wrestling with an enemy inside his own chest, made me pause. For the first time since being brought to this cold, impossible house, I believed him. Not entirely, not foolishly, but enough. And that was what frightened me most. I turned from him, crossing the marble floor to the vast windows where the city glowed beneath the night sky. Freedom stretched out there, distant, unreachable. Yet behind me, the man who claimed to own me was offering something I did not yet understand. I pressed my palm against the glass and whispered, too low for him to hear. I will not break. Behind me, I felt his gaze sharpen, like he had heard anyway.
I had spent years building walls around myself, calculating every risk, controlling every outcome. But tonight, watching Charlotte against the city lights, I understood a truth I had not wanted: some things cannot be controlled. Some debts cannot be measured. And Charlotte Davis was no longer just a debt. She was the beginning of something that unsettled me more than any rival, more than any betrayal. She was a choice I had not planned to make, and yet one I could not stop myself from making again and again. The thought should have been weakness. Instead, it felt like inevitability. I stepped forward, stopping just behind her. Close enough to see her reflection in the glass, close enough to let the silence carry the promise I could not yet name. Then don't break, I murmured. Bend. Fight. Burn. But stay. Her eyes met mine in the reflection, steady, unafraid. And for the first time since this began, I felt the smallest flicker of something I thought had died in me long ago. Hope.
Then don't break, he murmured. Bend. Fight. Burn. But stay. The words sank into me like heat through ice. I had come here a prisoner wrapped in silk, a pawn in my father's ruin. But standing before Alexander now, I realized something dangerous. He wasn't asking me to vanish inside his shadow. He wanted me seen. It would be so much easier to hate him completely, to turn my back and let the fire of my anger consume what little strength I had left. But I had lived long enough in the prison of my father's making to know one truth. Survival was not found in escape alone. It was found in choosing where to stand when the storm came. I turned from the glass and faced him fully. You want me to stay? Then you stop pretending this is only about debt. Stop pretending I am here because of him. If I stay, it is because of you. The silence stretched between us, sharp and heavy. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I thought he might step back, retreat into the armor of his pride. But he didn't. Instead, he reached for me.
Her words cut deeper than any blade. She was right, this had never only been about her father. Revenge was the excuse. She was the reason. I had spent years defining myself by what was taken from me. But tonight, in the fire of her defiance, I saw something I had never allowed myself to see: the possibility of choosing something for myself. Someone. I touched her hand, not with possession this time, but with something rarer. Restraint. Her pulse beat against my palm, a rhythm that matched my own. I don't care for lies, I said at last. So I'll give you truth. You were never just a debt, Charlotte. You were always the prize I didn't dare reach for. Her eyes softened, just enough. And in that moment, I knew, the ledger was closed. The revenge finished. The war had ended in a way I hadn't expected, not with destruction, but with surrender. Mine.
For the first time since this nightmare began, the air between us shifted. He wasn't the executioner of my father's sins. He wasn't the cruel billionaire whose walls stretched higher than the sky. He was a man, raw and uncertain. And his confession was the first stone he'd laid at my feet instead of on my shoulders. I could have walked away then, demanded freedom, taken the silence as a chance to escape. But I didn't want escape anymore. Not if it meant leaving behind the only man who had ever looked at me and seen fire instead of fragility. So I gave him my hand, not as currency, not as debt, but as choice. I'll stay, I said, my voice steady. Not because of my father. Not because you command it. But because I want to see where this fire takes us.
The empire outside could collapse, the city could burn, and I would not care. Because in that moment, Charlotte Davis had given me what I thought impossible: not compliance, not fear, but choice. And it was enough. I bent my head and kissed her hand, not like a conqueror, but like a man unarmed for the first time in years. The debt was paid. The war was over. And for the first time in my life, I was free.